What's going on, guys? It's Bromley from Empire Barbell. Today we're back going over the twice per week squat progression from Greg Nuckols' 28 free programs. So we've already covered the once and twice per week bench program. I just did the once per week squat program before this. So we're gonna build off, add some layers of complexity and kind of see what we come up with, see if we can pick apart his thought process on this and get some better ideas for our own training. To start out, the once per week progression for beginners started out similar to day one on the twice per week progression, 75, 80, 85%. One of the key differences is that this was one set to failure followed by a few sets at slightly less reps than what you had gotten on your failure set. So one set all out. If you got 12, then it'd be a few sets of 10 after that. Or if you got 8, a few sets of 6. So we notice that this is now just sets across, 6 by 6, 75% is about a 10 rep max, so that's not hard. 5 by 5, 3 by 1, and then we go into a very light kind of recovery session to allow us to recover for the max we're gonna hit that week on day 2. So one of the reasons I can see that he did it this way is because now we're incorporating a second day of squatting and we're actually working up to a rep max, a max set of 8, then a max set of 5, and then a max set of 3. So that represents our limit workout. So before there was an AMRAP set, that was kind of the limit. That was a very high effort set, which is very productive for beginners, especially provided that they have some type of technical foundation, but it's a very quick, very easy way to spur growth early on. So now instead of doing an AMRAP set, we're working up to a max and a specific rep threshold. So it's a little more strength specific. You're going to hit your failure reps or your last really hard reps in a heavier range, because we're not going to be failing around 10, 12, 13 reps. We're failing around 8, then 5, then 3. So it's a much heavier day than the failure sets we had before. And then we're doing something similar at that weight. We're then going to 3 sets to 5 to 6, 3 sets of 3 to 4, 3 sets of 1 to 2. So it's the same idea of doing something very hard and then staying at the same weight and doing more work with just fewer reps per set. So that's kind of the same pattern he's using. So this is squatting twice per week. So we have kind of easy volume across, followed by a very hard set at a specific rep range, and then more volume in that fatigue state. And then this second day is what ultimately takes us all the way to our max 1. So this goes 75, 80, 85 on day 2. This is gonna look more like 80, 85, 90, and then 100%. So we see this is an example of DUP, daily undulating periodization. It's a broad term. It just means you're working different thresholds on different days. Just about every program that has you do the same lift more than once a week, with the exception of like a starting strength, a strong lifts, a Grayskull LP. If you're not just adding 5 pounds every session, if you're working some other threshold, it's gonna fall under the wide umbrella of DUP. So undulating periodization, we're just working in a different percentage range, we're working at a different threshold. We're going maximally on day 2, where we're just doing light work across on day 1. So it's the rep range, it's the total number of sets and reps, it's the percentage, it's the threshold, it's the difficulty. All that plays into how day 1 will be different than day 2 when you have some type of DUP split. And there's a lot of ways to do it, so don't worry about it too much. So I like this split. I like the idea of squatting twice a week. That works for everybody. Most people can recover from it. Beginners are going to get their squat technique down faster if they're squatting more frequently. Even more advanced lifters will benefit and be able to handle the volume, provided you're having a different stimulus. Remember, recovery as you get more advanced is important, but different has a similar effect as a reduced amount of stress when it comes to recovery. So if you have this set stimulus, to recover on another day, you can either do less work or you can do a different stressor, and that has a recovery effect built in. It's one of the reasons people like DUP, because you can work hard twice per week just by varying the stress a little bit. So going into an intermediate split, remember I've said these in all of my videos about this. This isn't a universal beginner, intermediate, advanced program. They all seem to be intermediate and advanced relative to the baseline they set. Beginners can do a lot more work than what gets prescribed here. It almost seems like they're intentionally prescribing a specific amount of work so that we have the option of adding more work later on to keep growth coming. So this seems to be like deliberately holding back, even though beginners can absolutely work a lot harder. That doesn't mean you should. This is plenty of work and you absolutely will grow from this. So don't go as a beginner, go in and start tacking on more work just because you think you can. But beginners can absolutely handle a ton of work, especially in a heavy range. But I like the idea of throttling back, sticking to the plan, learning how to make the progression work for you, And then as numbers get stale going in, and Nuckols makes it very clear as you go down, he adds in more volume, he adds in more accessory, he adds in more sets as you volumize as time goes on. So you always have that option of making yourself grow when things get stagnant by doing a little bit more work. And that seems to be peculiar to him. I'm sure there's a lot of other people that do it, but that doesn't seem to be universally what goes on when coaches or programs move people down the advanced totem pole. So going into intermediate, now we're starting a little heavier on day one. So our squat day, instead of 75, we're starting at 80. So we're going to 80, 85, 90%. So we're starting in a heavier rep range. Okay, so we're a little more sport specific, strength specific, sorry. And then when we go into day two, we're switching to front squats instead of squats. So again, this appears to be an arbitrary change. This seems to be a logical progression from beginner. There's a lot of things you can tweak. You can tweak the rep ranges, the percentage, again, the difficulty, whether or not you're doing sets to failure or not. Nuckols chose to switch the exercise selection. So now we're working towards a max 8 in a front squat instead of a regular squat. And we're making up for that because you can push a front squat really hard, but the absolute weight you're going to handle, the percentages, the total stress you're going to handle in day two in the beginner range is going to be more than a front squat because the weight is absolutely lower. It basically means going balls out in a front squat for an 8 rep max. You're not going to use as much weight as a squat for an 8 rep max. So in some sense, the stress is lower. Even if it's really hard, even if it's a true balls out 8 rep max in a front squat, it's not going to be systemically as draining, which means it's not going to be systemically as conducive to making you adapt as if you were doing a max 8 in a squat. So this seems to fit nicely with starting a little heavier on day one. So those seem to go hand in hand. He switched the exercises, but he made up for the lack of intensity, for the lack of absolute weight by having you start a little heavier on the squat day. That's what makes sense to me when I look at the changes he's making. But it still works the same way. It's very linear, 5x5, 4x3, 3x1. So sets drop, reps drop, weight goes up to allow recovery, and then you progress your front squats, and then you finish with actually maxing on both of them, which is a nice little, that's a spicy week. Hit a max squat and a max front squat. But I like this split as well. You're starting to see how you can vary things. He could have actually kept squatting the same, and he could have just adjusted the sets and reps, the threshold you work on there. You'll see DUP type splits where you have, let's say, your kind of heavy volume that progresses and volume that's just arbitrarily lighter. Or you'll see if you're doing, let's say, reps across here, you might have on day two where you're actually hitting, closer to a 1 rep max, where you're doing maximum work. You do a 3, a 2, a 1. And specifically because you're dealing with a front squat, again, it's not going to come with the same beatdown. So you have a lot of options. Don't get caught up in the variety. It's not in your best interest to try to do all the programs, all the variations. We're just trying to break down how this fits together, see how these progressions work so we can connect dots more easily down the road, and so we have more tools to work with if we try to put our own stuff together. You're not trying to do all the programs. We're trying to have a base of information to pull from to solve specific problems down the road. So as we go into advanced, we keep the same intermediate split. We're still doing front squats on day two. That's an intermediate progression all the way down. We're still squatting on day one. It's an intermediate progression all the way down. Now again, Nuckols pattern, as you get stagnant with a specific program, as you get into the realm of being more advanced, more dialed in with a specific progression, add more work. Easiest way to grow, add more work. Everyone can add more work. And adding an accessory, quad dominant, hip dominant accessory, again, you don't get the systemic beat down, so you're still abiding by recovery. So it's this nice little tightrope we're walking. We're adding in more stress to break you past homeostasis, but we're not adding in just this onslaught of barbell work that's going to make it impossible to recover and impossible to hit those percentage jumps, because you still need to be looking forward each week. I do 80% and all this accessory. I know I need to handle 85% next week. If I do so much work on day one, let's say with barbell, or let's say anything that's systemically draining, I might find a week later I'm too drained to do the work that's prescribed. So I really like the idea that he leans on this accessory work to add more volume to get you to grow, but it's still going to allow you to recover enough systemically to deal with your jumps that are scheduled each week. Remember, if you're too beat down from one workout, you're not going to be able to do the amount of work next week that you need to do to keep the pattern of growth going. Day two, again, front squatting, and then we're adding in on top of that. So we're running through this, max 8, and then 3 sets of 5 to 6 reps at that weight on the front squat. Then we're doing the same thing with wide stance pause squats, except we're doing it a little lighter, max 10, and then 7 to 8 reps for sets across on that. And then that progresses down, 10 stays to 5s. So the rep range is a little lighter. Wide stance pause squat, so now we're doing a back squat, but again, it's varied. Instead of going, upright and narrow, you're going wider, you're pausing at the bottom. It's a different stimulus. Yes, it will help some weaknesses, but also it's kind of variety just for the sake of it. If you aren't used to squatting wide and if you aren't used to pausing, adding those in after you've adapted to these two types of cycles is definitely going to give you a hit of growth no matter who you are. So it's an important thing to know. These are generic recommendations. This is variety for the sake of it, which everybody needs in some dose at some point. So it's good to know what variations you can kind of lean on. But also that this could be used theoretically to solve a specific weakness. You don't necessarily have to wait until you get all the way down here to incorporate something like that. Day 2 on the intermediate split, you could just as easily do a wide stance pause squat. You could do a box squat. You could do a Zercher squat. There's no reason that front squats specifically are special, only in as much as they provide a specific stimulus that you could potentially recover from. Different movements will take it out of you to a different capacity. So this is just more work all the way across. Now again, it's all relative. If you are a very advanced bodybuilder or if you're used to a ton of volume, you might look at this and be like, that's a normal Tuesday. I could crank all that out all at once. Most of you aren't going to be used to this amount of work, which is why it's so important that you follow the type of progression over time. Let yourself slowly adapt to the volume so that you can meet the prescribed percentages on the main progression. Because there's no point in laying out a percentage-based progression if the amount of work you do prevents you from recovering to the point where you can meet those numbers. So again, you have to walk that tightrope, but as time goes on, you always have the option of adding more work. If you feel like you've been training for a very long time, feel like you've gotten very strong, take inventory of how many exercises you do, how much accessory do you do, what's the rep range, do you increase the rep range over time? Once you take inventory of that, you can see, okay, for the last few months, I've only been doing, let's say 15 total working sets in a workout. Well, let's try taking that to 25 for a few weeks. It's the same idea. You're disrupting homeostasis by adding in more work. And because we're not just doing blind barbell work, we're doing variations, we're doing things that don't tax us as much or that tax us in a different way. We're allowing ourselves to still meet this cadence, to meet our percentages, and then have a planned peak where we hit a mini peak anyways, where we hit a 1 rep max, where we could hit a PR and then readjust those numbers. So that's a breakdown of twice per week. Again, this gets complex because of all of the potential options we have. So don't put these programs on a pedestal like they have some magic quality to them. They're all the same. You have a baseline of work that you start off with and you make logical jumps as time goes on, either increasing the stimulus, varying the stimulus, finding some way to disrupt what becomes the norm for you based on how you normally train. If you ever want to know what to do moving forward, all you got to do is look back. Look back over the last few months. What have you been doing? I just need to improve off of that. That doesn't just mean add weight, add weight, add weight. That means doing more work, more varied exercises, finding ways to round yourself out. And that's really what this boils down to. This is not that exotic or that specific or that scientifically formulated. It is just a logical advancement off of what the intermediates did, which is a logical advancement off of the very simple beginner program. So I'm a big fan of this. Again, it's easy to plug this into your week. You could very easily do your deadlift work. I would not recommend a third day of deadlifts if you do a 2-day per week split. I would recommend finding a way to put your deadlift work on these days. So you could absolutely do, you could squat both days and then afterwards you could do some type of deadlift type movement. You could do RDLs one day, let's say block pulls the next day. Or you could just do pure hamstring work so you don't have to deal with the systemic breakdown of doing a barbell hip hinge twice a week, because that can be really hard to deal with. I'm a big fan of RDLs on twice a week squatting splits because muscularly they develop your posterior, but they don't take it out of you. So you'll still be able to meet these percentages. I would not try to follow this while running a deadlift program on top of it that's supposed to have you max every 4 weeks. You don't want a deadlift program that's going to mirror this. That will not be sustainable. So look at deadlifts as an accessory. You can do deadlifts for reps, deadlift variations for reps. You could follow the same pattern of volumizing over time on something like an RDL or a stiff-legged deadlift. You could follow a volume percentage-based progression, provided you don't try to max at the end. And you can rotate in different movements to try and keep yourself rounded out. So you want to pair those in together. Don't do a third day of deadlifts. Just do it after the main squat work and do something that's kind of reduced weight that's just adapting you to work over time. That'll be the most sustainable way of doing it. And then down the road, you can put squats on the back burner and you can do a deadlift max cycle. I think it's really beneficial for everybody, beginners and everyone else, to stagger what they focus on with their squat and your deadlift. You should always be doing both, but you should stagger which one takes priority. That's my recommendation. So this is my breakdown of the twice a week squatting. Next time you see me, we're gonna be doing the 3 times a week and break that down. That'll get really hairy. So go ahead and leave any questions you have in the comment box. Go ahead and take it to the forum, start a thread, empire-forum.com. Thanks for watching, guys. Till next time, this is Bromley at Empire Barbell. I'll see you.